Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Ask a Sex Therapist. We have a guest this week and it's going to be really fun. We're going to talk about how to approach other women as a woman. We're going to get into play parties and all sorts of fun topics. So stay tuned for that. But first, we're going to do the review of the week. So just as a reminder, if you take the time to review the show, which, don't do it if you're driving, but maybe set a reminder for yourself to do it later. If you hear your review read on the show, you actually win a prize bundle of books. So you can pick any 3 books from my Amazon storefront. The link to the storefront is in the show notes if you just scroll down on whatever device you're listening to. And there's also our email address to contact us to claim your prize. So this week's review says, "Good job. I never thought that I would ever listen to a podcast like this because I never felt comfortable talking about this stuff, probably because I was raised in that way. But you made it very comfortable for me talking about topics that are difficult for a lot of people to face, including myself. Really something else of a podcast. Keep it up." So thank you so much for this review. These are so motivational and just keep me going. Not to mention, they also help more people find the show. So thank you for your support and please email us and claim your free prize. All right, so I'm going to introduce our guest today. Kesiena Boom is a sex and relationships writer, counselor in training, and award-winning sociologist with a background in gender studies. You can read more about her and find examples of her work at her website, which we will link to in the show notes. She writes from a queer perspective and is interested in understanding the interplays of power and pleasure that inform our intimate relationships. So welcome, Kesiena. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Heather. Hi, everyone listening. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
And doesn't she have such a cute accent? I think you're our first person with a fun accent, so I'm excited about that.
I'm honored.
Yeah. So Kesiena and I know each other more so from her journalist role, where I've been a source at times. And then I was reading over her website and I was like, oh my God, she has so many good qualifications. I need to have her on the show. So very excited to have her here. So we are going to dive in the first topic. We're going to go through a few different topics with this episode. It's a little bit different than some of the other guests. The first one that we mentioned was the idea of asserting desires as a queer woman. Kesiena, tell us, what does that mean to you and what kind of issues do you feel like kind of come up with that and like get in the way sometimes?
Absolutely. So I think a problem that I hear a lot about from other queer women is that they hit this kind of roadblock where they have trouble articulating their desires, not just for other people, but also for themselves. It's pretty hard to be able to express like, I like X, Y, and Z to a partner if you haven't even really taken the time yourself to think about what it is that you want or need to have good and pleasurable sex. I think that sometimes I feel that people, queer women in particular, should like really take the time to slow down and figure it out, like, what is it that turns me on? Like, yes. I think it's so common, I think, for people to sort of like turn up to sex and just be like, okay, I guess we're having sex. Cool, that's exciting. But like, what next, you know?
I love that. Cool, that's exciting. Yes, it is.
Yeah, happy everyone having sex. But I think that like taking the time to sort of like poke around inside of like the nooks and crannies of our desires can only be really beneficial. And I think that if it feels a little bit overwhelming to just sort of sit there and think, well, what do I like? Then it can be really helpful, I think, to turn to culture to see what other people are into. I know that often the advice is to watch porn to get inspiration. And I mean, I think that that has its place for sure. But I also think that sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming to look at porn and try to like apply that to your own life. Like, it's not exactly so easy to just be like, oh yeah, I can see myself doing that, when that is maybe not so reflective of your life.
Right. I mean, like flipping upside down and doing a million different positions and almost like coming on command.
I didn't go to the gym this week. I don't think I'm up to that. Like, it's just... it's not so realistic. I mean, I think like something that's really instrumental, I think, in a lot of queer people forming of their sexuality is turning to other sources of culture, like books or films. I would really recommend reading books. I mean, can I shout out some books?
Please, yeah. Any specifics are very encouraged here.
Okay, wonderful. So a really great book that I really think has some really beautiful and hot and interesting sex scenes is a book called Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler.
Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl.
It's
so interesting.
Honestly amazing. It's a book about a queer guy named Paul who is also a shapeshifter, so he can shift his body at command. So he spends half of his time like living like a fabulous like life as like a queer man, and the other times like living as a lesbian, and flipping between having like a lot of like hot dyke sex and then a lot of like hot like gay male sex. There's really something for everyone in this book, and it's like so beautifully written, super evocative, and I think can really give you a feel for like what is it in the like everyday of life that like turns me on, like in sex that can happen like when I go to a bar or when I'm at a music festival or just when I'm like out and about living my best queer life. Like what is it that can like spark desire in me from the people around me? So yes, Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. Massive.
Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes too. That sounds like a fascinating book, just in general, too.
It's really good. I really cannot sing its praises loud enough. Andrea Lawler, if you ever happen to hear this, I love your work. Please write another novel. I'm waiting. And then I guess if people are interested in more of like a BDSM and kink sort of angle, then another really good novel is X by Davy Davis, which follows a person who is generally a sadist, but who lets themselves get topped by a hot femme masochist and is like, gets really hot femme sadist, and becomes absolutely obsessed with her.
So we might have to break down these terms for people because I have not done a kink episode yet, and I don't know that people will know the term femme, but I think you might be the perfect person to break down the term femme because I read an article you wrote about it. So tell people what you mean by that.
Right. So a few years ago, I wrote an article for Slate about women and femmes. That's correct. So femme is a term that we use within the queer community to describe queer people with a feminine gender expression. It can be used by people of all genders, but specifically queer people, to express like a very like defiant and specific form of femininity that has nothing to do with like performing for the straight male gaze. I think that's probably the most succinct way of putting it.
Okay, so someone can be femme regardless of their gender identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can be a non-binary femme, or you can be a femme woman. You know, like a lot of gay men also refer to themselves as femmes. Like it has cross queer applications.
And can you even break down queer? Like, how would you define queer? Because I actually got asked this by someone the other day.
Yeah, that's a big PhD long question.
And I'll jump in if I need to. But I mean, I'm curious how similar your definition is to what I said the other day.
Absolutely. So for me, queer is about a couple of different things. It's about having a sexuality that isn't straight, or a gender that isn't cisgender. And it's about locating yourself in the world in a way that stands in opposition to norms around sexuality, bodies, desire, and gender. So I think that to be queer, you need to not straight and or not cisgender, i.e. not transgender. And I think that you also need to have some kind of political commitment to trying to like challenge normative behaviors and assumptions around sexuality and gender.
Yeah. That's an interesting piece, like the political stance, because I agree with you. And I think there is an element with the word queer of like, I'm not going to just play into like heteronormative, cis normative stuff in general.
Yes, I think that that's definitely an element of it, because I think it's very possible to, be a person who is gay or bisexual or whatever, and to still be quite wedded to heteronormative ideals and norms, you know? So I think that it's really a two-parter for me.
I also think, and I'm curious what you think about this too, it's a label still, but it almost feels like an anti-label label, like a little bit, where maybe someone's like, don't just like pigeonhole me as like just gay or just lesbian or just bi, or so what do you think about that piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people are attracted to queer because it can contain multitudes. I think that it's signaling something about your sexuality and gender, but it's not giving you like a detailed roadmap to follow, so to speak. And I think that for a lot of people living in that sort of like in between, you can't pin me down, can be really attractive and feel very empowering. I think that like for me personally, I describe my sexuality as like lesbian and queer because I like to be like specific about like what flavor of queer I am. But yeah, I know that a lot of people love to like float around in that queer soup and be like, you can't, you just don't know. And that's like exciting to me.
And one of the things I love, and there was an interesting episode of my friend Evan's podcast. His podcast is Love You, and we can link to this episode. But he did an episode on gender roles, and he referenced some research about things like relationship satisfaction in general. And basically, people in queer relationships were happier. Like, long story short.
I'm shook.
Yeah, you're so interesting.
You don't tell me more.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is what you just said, where like there's maybe not as many roadmaps. Like if you're in a queer relationship, like if you're a woman with another woman or a guy with another guy or a non-binary person with whoever, there's not as much in the culture, I think, about like what that should look like. Like there's less of a should, maybe. Not that there's zero. And I also think like the more, it's like this weird irony too, where it's almost like the more mainstream it can become to be queer, probably the more of a roadmap there is. But like, I think what I want for everyone listening is like, let's all throw away our roadmaps and like show up and figure out like what that means. And so sometimes I think that's something that, straight people can also learn from the queer community is like, let's throw out our roadmap and just like be present with another person and figure it out. But
yes,
it takes more work.
Absolutely. I'm nodding vigorously. I realize you cannot see this, but I'm nodding. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like as people, I think that we're drawn to, what's familiar, what's comforting, and that can often be, the things that we know, the things that we've read, the things that we've seen modeled. So it's not really surprising that people fall back into these habits and norms, but it can really feel so, liberating when you realize that actually it's not a imperative and you have the power to change them up if you want.
All right, let's see what other juicy topics we have for people. Okay, so we started getting into women knowing what they want. You mentioned a couple books that people could check out to help themselves like figure out what they want in bed and what's sexy to them and what's turning them on. Do you have any other suggestions for like how people can figure this out if it's not something they've really explored, especially as a queer woman?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that taking time to like really reflect, like look back on your life and think about like, what are some moments that have really turned me the fuck on? Like if I think back through like the sexual encounters that I've had, or if you haven't had sex yet, the things that have like given you butterflies in your stomach or made you feel this kind of like, amorous feelings, like really trying to like pin that down, like it's very easy to be like, oh, I don't know, like I like blondes or, something like that, something a bit more like surface. But I don't know, what kind of smells turn you on? Like what kind of turns you on in the way that like people look at you? Like, do you want to feel, how do you want to feel in a sexual encounter? Do you want to feel powerful? Do you want to feel powerless? Do you want to feel overpowered? Like, what is it that like lights that spark in you? Like just take some time to like lie on your bed and just like really like let your mind wander and like feel, to like really just try and be present and feel your feelings without thinking, oh, I shouldn't be turned on by that. Or is it okay to be turned on by that? or, you know, like just let it be. I think that's a really good place to start. And then I think once you've
so healthy.
Sorry.
Good.
And then I think once you've done that, it can be really helpful to start to try to write some things down, like get something concrete down just for yourself. Don't plan to show it to anyone. This is just for you to like let your erotic imagination run wild. And then you can like practice trying to say these things to yourself, like in the mirror, in a way that you might want to like explain to a partner in the future, so that you become comfortable with being like, okay, this is what I like, and this is how I can express it to another person. And it might feel super weird at first, but the more that you like practice and like get more like into the groove, it will start to feel really natural and good and honestly exciting, you know, when you start to take more control over it.
I love that.
Yeah. Those are my top tips.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I like the mirror part too, and just this idea that taking this time to figure it out and to then articulate it. Because I mean, I know for me, like in the past, it was like, I don't know, I was like turned on or I'm not, you know, and there wasn't so much of like a putting together. Okay, so why was I turned on? What specifically was it? You know, and even imagining like, okay, well, if the person looked different, or if the person's tone of voice was different, or if the way they touched me or the way that I approached them, you know, so there's just so many little nuances there that I do think can get missed if we don't take the time to be curious.
Yes, 100%. Taking the time to be curious. I think that is such a beautiful way of summing up how you should approach your sexuality in general. There's always something new to discover, for sure. I think it can also be, depending on the kind of relationship that you have with your friends, like trying to talk about these things with your friends so that you're not in like a situation where you feel like sexual pressure, you know, you're just like having cocktails with your friends or whatever, and you're just like sort of like testing the idea of like putting your sexual self out into the world without having to like, you know, follow through. Like that can feel pretty freeing.
Like that. I also will say, I think talking about sex with friends is really important. I almost think that could be a whole separate topic in podcast.
100%.
Yeah. But I had a friend growing up, because I mean, part of my story too is that like I was not always comfortable talking about sex, you know? And I remember I had a friend who talked about masturbation or using a vibrator, and I was like, oh, we can talk about this in front of other people? Like, what? Really? And then like other people started jumping into the conversation. I think this was when we were in college. And it was like just opened up this world of possibilities. Like, oh, you'd be comfortable enough to talk about this. How cool. So practice with friends is good. You also mentioned here vocalizing what you like in bed, especially if you've slept with more men than women. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that can kind of complicate things for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of women who primarily have slept with men have either consciously or subconsciously let the men's desires sort of rule the show. So it can be harder to sort of like, to be comfortable with having your desires in the first place and then asserting them, because straight men's sexuality, you know, is given such like centrality in culture. So men really are not afraid to know what they want and, you know, take what they want, ask for what they want, and, you know, sort of just like show up and run the show. So I think that it can be extra important for women who have slept with a lot of men to really think about like, okay, how much of the time are my desires like taking center stage? How much of the time am I advocating for like what I like, what I need, what makes me feel good? How can I like have an orgasm?
That makes so much sense to me, because it's like, you're right. Like there's statistics on this with pornography too, which by the way, as we mentioned, it can be a tool, but also it's a business and it's entertainment. And it's mostly men who pay for porn. And so porn is mostly going to cater to the people who are paying for it. You know, I think it's like there's twice as many blowjobs shown as, you know, oral sex on women. And so like that's interesting. And there's a lot of depictions of people just like coming from penetration when that's not kind of the most reliable or effective way for most people with a vulva to orgasm. So, you know, there's just, I think it's like you're saying, Kesiena, that like it tends to be the men's experience being centered. And I do think sometimes if we look at porn as an educator instead of an entertainer, that's where I think it can become problematic. So just keeping that in mind.
You know, take inspiration, don't take detailed notes. Is
right. Also, maybe find more feminist porn and find more queer-centered porn, and you know,
absolutely.
Try.
There is so much queer porn out there. For example, I know a hot classic that many queers swear by are the Crash Pad series.
We'll link to that too.
So shout out to Crash Pad.
Okay, so we'll link to the Crash Pad series. You guys are going to have all of these fun tools in the show notes that you can access to kind of keep going on your journey. But yeah, I can see like if you're centering men's experiences and then you're like, oh, now there's just us two women and there's no guy here. Like, what do we do?
Yeah, I think that a lot of women can feel a bit like paralyzed, like, oh, okay, now it's just on me, I guess. Like, what next? But like I said earlier, there are plenty of things that you can do alone to start to like get to know your own sexuality and to get comfortable with expressing it to your partner.
I would also say take pressure off too. You know, like if it's one of your first few times, you know, hooking up with another woman, to let it be imperfect and like let yourself say things, or, you know, like, oh, how about we try this? Or I don't know. Or, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's also really important to like keep sight of the fact that sex should be fun. Like, you know,
I think it should be like number one.
Yeah, that's like good to remember for sure. And I think that like, you know, I can definitely remember all of the anxieties that I had as a young person around like, how am I going to know what to do? What's going to happen? I don't know. But the thing about sex is that like, you're not the only person there. Like there's another person there for you to like, well, maybe more than one, but there's at least one other person present for you to like bounce your ideas off of. And, you know, you make something together. Like you don't have to like have everything planned out perfectly in your head. Like you're responsible for like being like, okay, what are my desires and like what do I like? But like you'll never be able to like completely like know how sex is going to look or how it's going to turn out, because, you know, it's something that you're going to co-create together.
I love that. Like I think we need to look at sex as a creative process. And it reminds me of like improv, you know, it's like, it's not fully scripted. Usually. Yeah. Right.
I've never done improv. Does it show?
Well, yes, there is. Yeah. A lot of people are familiar with that phrase, yes, and, you know, so it's kind of just like rolling with what's coming up and adding your own, you know, little perspective and flavor to it. Yeah.
Yes. Not bringing anyone out of the scene. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
It's a great metaphor. I'm loving this.
I think so. Yeah, I think I'm actually going to have an improv comedian on here at some point in the relatively near future, so people can stay tuned for that. Okay, so you mentioned an interesting little tidbit that kind of was going to segue into one of our other topics about there could be more than one person in the sexual encounter. And so that brings us to the idea of play parties. So what is a play party and how do people go to them, and should they?
Fun. Okay, so play parties are basically spaces that you can go to engage in sex and kink activities with other people in a semi-public kind of place. So play is often a word that people use in like BDSM communities to refer to BDSM acts and or to sex. So hence the term play parties. And they can be held in private homes, like people can host them in their houses or apartments. They can also be hosted in clubs, whether those are like regular clubs that are taken over or in specialist sex clubs. So it really depends on where you're going and what the vibe is. I think that like it can feel a little overwhelming maybe for people to be like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go to a sex party.
How do they even find out about them?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So it really depends on where you live and the kind of scene around you. If you live in a place like a bigger city, then it shouldn't be so hard to find like a local kink community who can signpost you. If you sign up for a website called FetLife, that's like a BDSM social networking site, and you can often find parties and people who are in the know there. You can also just look on Facebook sometimes.
Really?
Yeah, you would be surprised what you can find. And I think also, like, don't be afraid. Like, if you know one person, like just one person who you know is into something a little bit out there, like, don't be afraid to like give them a little nudge and be like, hey, so I'm kind of interested in like getting into the scene. You know, do you have any tips on like where I can go, what I can do, you know, because they might have access to, for example, private Facebook groups that they can invite you to, or WhatsApp groups, or etc. It can be a little bit intimidating at first if you don't really like know anyone, of course. But the thing about play parties is that they often have a lot of rules, and that can be a way to make people feel safe, because it's like, okay, this is the dress code, I need to follow this, and these are the rules around alcohol, and I need to follow this. And they will often have like very like strict times about like when you can leave, when you can arrive. You know, it'll be like doors open at 7, but you know, make sure that you don't arrive after 8, you know, because they like to make sure that everyone is like in the space who's going to be in the space for the night. So you get to know everyone's faces, and there aren't like randoms turning up, you know, 3 hours in when your butt's in the air.
Just, you know, just an average Saturday night. But it's true. So it's the idea of creating a safe container. It's like we're creating this safe space where, you know, we've got rules, then, you know, people know when to show up. And I would also add, you know, don't have like your first thing on FetLife to be to like go to a play party with a bunch of people you've never met. But like most of them will screen people, I feel like, anyways. Like they would want to meet you beforehand. And I would say like, look for that. Like, you know, if they're not screening anyone, that's probably not one you want to go to anyways.
Yeah, you often will have to fill in some kind of like online form where you describe a bit about yourself. And depending on what kind of party it is, you know, it might be specifically screened. So there's like a mix of genders, mix of ages, like this kind of thing. That's something to be aware of, especially for single men. Often single men are not allowed to attend play parties by themselves. So if you are a single man, then you might need to find a woman who wants to go along with you so that you can gain entry. And that's just kind of out of like a safety perspective. I think that kind of grew out of.
Yeah, it does seem like that. I think it's the type of thing where, you know, some guys have ruined it for the rest of the guys. And so a lot of guys who are very respectful and like want to go to these parties do kind of need to find a female to go with.
But there are also a lot of parties that are like queer centered where, you know, they're open to all genders, and it's very like explicit that queer people of all genders, and it's very explicit that people will not be like gendered at the door or made to in any way like their gender. So if you're a queer person looking for a play party, then that's something to really look out for, because that can feel really nice to not feel as like a trans or a gender non-conforming person to feel like you're going to be scrutinized for having the quote unquote right gender to enter the space.
I like that, because I do think that the swinger community, or some of the scene, quote unquote, as you mentioned, can be very like gendering. That actually is helpful to know. And do you think FetLife is still the place to go to find those, or do you have any other recommendations?
There are definitely quiz on FetLife. I know that also I haven't been on Instagram for some years, but I also know that Instagram is a place to like find out about parties. So you can like scroll through different BDSM, play party, queer, blah, blah, blah kind of tags and try to find things. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I will also add, I think you kind of alluded to this, Kesiena, that the more you kind of just ask questions or speak up a little bit, you know, I know for me, I'm relatively new in St. Petersburg, Florida, where I live, and obviously being a sex therapist kind of puts it out there for me. I just say my job and people tell me things. But, you know, if you put anything out there that's sex positive, I also feel like people will find you, you know, because I think there's a lot of people that maybe don't lead with that, but once they know someone is, you know, friendly to those types of things, they might bring it up. So
yes, I cannot agree more. That's absolutely true for sure. Like, I write about sex and relationships, and I cannot stop people from telling me about that.
I know sometimes it's like not on the clock. do you get that too, where you're just like, okay, like I'm not being paid for this right now?
Yeah, I'm like, you know what? I would be super, super happy to answer your questions, but you will need to PayPal me first, and then we can like absolutely talk about it, like for sure. Right. But it can be a bit much when people, you know, like fully want like a whole, like, I don't know, me to like excavate their sexual psyche, and I'm like, whoa, lady, I don't know you, and you know, I'm trying to just like chill right now.
Right. Even sex positive people are not in sex mode all the time.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm just trying to eat a pizza. Like,
yeah. Okay. So another thing, and this could even be relevant to the play party stuff, but you mentioned identifying as a top or a bottom. And I don't know if that's a concept everyone knows about, but I do think it's important. And you kind of explained it about, kind of like knowing what you want and asking for it, you know, and that being a bottom isn't a way out of that. Like, oh, I don't have to do anything and the other person will do all the work, you know?
Absolutely. This is something that I believe very strongly in, that identifying as a bottom is not a way out of owning your own desires. So for those who don't know what top and bottom mean, so in the context of like queer sex, a top is someone, well, it has two different meanings. It can mean the person who is doing the penetrating of the other yeah.
We're with you. We'll go with you.
And it can also have like a BDSM or kink context where the top is the person who is sort of controlling the dynamic, who has the power in the sexual dynamic, the negotiated power, I would like to add.
I think of it also as like the top is sort of giving the action and the bottom is like receiving the action.
Yeah, but I think that it's also definitely possible, and this is where it gets a bit messy, you can definitely also like top from the bottom. So, you know, you can, you know, instruct like someone very firmly to like fuck you. You know, backseat driving. Absolutely. So it's not always so cut and dry. But yeah, then the bottom is the person who is receiving the sexual acts, or the person who is consensually giving up their power in the sexual dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I feel like it can get a little complicated, like in the kink realm, because there's also like the idea of service tops, which like they're kind of in charge, but it's like they're doing it in service of the other person. So like the person receiving is still almost like dominant. So anyways, people, there's a lot of nuances here, but you're getting, I hope you get the
just
gist.
Like everything to do with sex, it's nuanced, it's not black and white, and it's, ask around, do some Googling, get into it.
Yes. Exactly. Because yes, agree. We agree on that. You also mentioned women approaching women. And this was something that came up during my listener Q&A last month. And I don't know if I did the topic justice. Hopefully I did okay. But I would love to hear your perspective as a queer woman on what you think about that.
I've always been pretty confident when it comes to like, okay, always is a stretch as a teenager. But ever since I like moved away from home and like came into my identity, blah, 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 I think that I've been like pretty forward, like if I'm interested in someone. And I found that this really makes me like stick out often amongst like my queer women friends, because they're like, oh no, I can't, I don't want to, like I'm too scared of rejection, or I'm too scared of being creepy. Like I think a lot of women have internalized this idea that expressing desire for another woman makes you quote unquote creepy, and they just really, really don't want to make, you know, another woman feel uncomfortable, which is of course admirable, but it comes from like a place that I would say is like internalized homophobia often, you know, because we grow up thinking that our desires are just wrong point blank, that it's wrong to have these feelings for women, and therefore it's doubly wrong to try and express those feelings to women. And that can be really paralyzing, you know, because you have all of these desires and you just like don't want to put them out there. I would just say lovingly to queer women out there, like, there's nothing wrong with your desires for other women. Like, it's a beautiful thing. And, you know, thinking that you're creepy for expressing respectful desire for another woman, that's just, that's not how it is. It's not creepy at all. And I think that we also internalize the idea that we're somehow like men because we also desire women, you know? And it's like the dynamic between two women is very different between the dynamic between a man and a woman, you know? If we look at like the role that like the structures of gender play in our society, like it's just, we're not bringing the same things to the table. So worrying about that like inherent power imbalance and creepiness is also like doubly irrelevant. I mean, not to say that there can't be power imbalances between women. Of course, race and class and all sorts of other things like complicate the picture. But ultimately, if you're worried about being creepy, you're probably not being creepy, you know? Like having that sort of like, self-awareness is like pretty much the first and only step, you know?
Right. Can we define it though a little bit? Because I do get this question a decent amount where people are like, oh, I just can never approach someone because I feel like I'm going to be a creep or I'm going to just come off weird. Like, what do you think is a creepy way to do it? And what do you think is a respectful way to approach?
Oh, okay. I think that context is important. Like, I don't think that it's cool to really like hit on someone if they're like, for example, at work and they're kind of like trapped somehow, you know, like that can feel a little bit creepy because then somehow like the power dynamic is off, you know. If someone is currently being paid to be polite and like, you know, to give that emotional labor to you, then the vibes are off, you know. So don't hit on like your massage therapist, for instance. You know, like that's not the wave. But like in a context like you're both at the bar as paying customers and, you know, you're next to her at the bar and you notice that she's cute and you're like, okay, shit, what am I gonna do? Like turning to her and being like, hey, I think you're really pretty. Can I buy you a drink? Or, hey, I really love your hair, glasses, I don't know, Doc Martens, or, you know, and other lesbian. You know, that's not creepy. Like, if she's not interested, she'll just say, no, thank you. And then you can just say, oh, okay, have a nice night, you know? Like, just accepting, you know, that interaction gracefully is also a big part of not being creepy. I feel like where a lot of men can go wrong is not taking no for an answer. And that's where things start to veer into creepy town.
I could not agree more. Right. Like, so being aware of power imbalances and what the context is that you're in, and then just take a no gracefully. You know, it doesn't mean that you're unattractive. It doesn't mean that you're, you know, undesirable in general. It just means like that moment, that person, not a fit. There's like millions of other fish in the sea.
Yes, absolutely. Take the L, move on. There's always someone else. Like, I think like it's not that deep. Like, it's never a reflection on like the deepest, darkest parts of you. Like, it's really, really not.
It's so important what you just said. And it's funny that I use the word importance, but it's almost like we need to lower the stakes, like lower the importance. Like, it's not a big deal. And if you just start doing this regularly, you'll be like, oh, like, yeah, maybe half the time it works and half the time it doesn't. Like, who cares?
Absolutely. I cannot agree more.
Yeah. And I love what you said for your approach too, of just like, oh, you're pretty. Can I buy you a drink? It's like so direct. It's like refreshingly direct. And I feel like we're so indirect these days.
I think that directness is absolutely key as a queer woman approaching another woman, because I think it's very easy for women to get stuck in this, are we flirting or are we being friendly? Like when this woman says that, you know, I'm really super hot, does she mean as a friend, or is this like, let's go and fuck in the bathroom? Like, what's the vibe? You know? So I think that like you've sometimes really got to be clear. If you ask a woman out on a date as a woman, do not say, do you want to hang out sometime? Do not say like, do you want to do X, Y, Z? Say, I would like to take you out on a date next week. How does that sound? You know, like, just cut off the ambiguity from the jump, because I cannot tell you how many times I've been like voice noting back and forth with my friends and they're like, am I on a date? Is this a date? Am I on a date? Am I currently on a date? Is she my girlfriend? I don't know, you know, like, So just don't even get it twisted. Like, just be really clear from the outset.
Oh, that's such good advice, honestly. Because I think we're just like afraid of rejection so much. And I mean, just hearing you talk, and I hope people who are listening can hear this, like, you just seem like it's fine. If I get rejected, it's fine. Like, I'm good.
It really is. It's part of dating. You gotta shoot your shot, and sometimes you're going to miss, and that's absolutely fine. You know, like, when it matters, you won't miss, and then you'll meet people who you have a good connection with.
And I think you're bringing up such a good point, you know, for queer women, because like women in general will be like, oh, you seem fun to hang out with, want to hang out sometime? And like, yeah, so there's no way to distinguish it from a date unless you say, I want to take you out, or do you want to go on a date with me? Like, so be clear and specific and just like bold. The other thing though, because as you're saying this, I'm kind of like, okay, I can see some women kind of being like, oh, but I don't want to like be the pursuer. Like, am I like being the man if I do that? You know, am I being too masculine? So like, what do you think about that?
Respectfully, I think that there's this phenomenon of women sort of sitting around being like, why don't I have a girlfriend? Or why haven't I had sex in like, you know, 2.5 years? Or, you know, what's going on with my lovelife.com? And it's like, well, you know, if you're not prepared to like make moves, then it's very rare that things just like fall into your lap. Like, you need to be a little bit of like an active participant in making your like love and sex life happen. Yeah. And I can absolutely understand wanting to be pursued and to feel desired. Like, don't we all? Absolutely. Yes, 100%. Totally. But, you know, that doesn't mean that you can't initiate something and then, like, you know, let the chase commence from there. Like, a person who is interested in you is going to show you that desire back. Like, you can say, let's go on a date. And then, you know, the next time they might plan a date, they might be like, okay, I'm going to pick you up at 8, you know, and like, let's do this, let's do that. Like, I think you're really hot, blah, blah, blah. But, like, are you really going to sit there and, like, I don't know, let things pass you by because you have like an idea of how things should be? Or are you like going to go out there and flirt with someone? Like, come on, let's go.
Yes. Go get your flirt on, everybody. You heard it.
100%.
And be clear.
And don't forget eye contact. Like, make good eye contact. Like, just a fraction longer than you need to, and then look away, and then look back just a little bit, and then look away again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, you know, for me growing up, it was also like, you know, you should just let people come to you, or like, don't be too vulnerable and don't put yourself out there, you know? And I think a lot of us got those messages from, you know, culture, from, you know, parents who like wanted to protect us. And, you know, it's like, go ahead, just be unprotected. I mean, don't have unprotected sex necessarily unless you're consenting to that risk level. Like, you can handle it. You know, I think a lot of us are like, oh, I can't handle it. And I think the more we get into, you know, our inner security and confidence, it's like, yes, we can.
Yeah, it's a muscle. Like, the more you flex it, it'll grow stronger, and it will feel less and less 100%. Intimidating every single time, you know? So So let's assign that as homework to all the listeners.
Everyone go push even if you're in a relationship, go like flirt with your partner more obviously than you normally would, and like hit on them a little bit more aggressively than you normally would. Of course, with respect and realizing you might get a no. But like, and then just know that you're going to be okay anyways.
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. That's everyone's homework. Thank you so much for being here, Kesiena. I really appreciate it. I love your perspective. I love the humor you bring to it and the confidence. And is there anywhere that people can find you? Do you want people to find you? I know you're not a big social media person.
I do not use social media, actually, but if people want to get in touch with me, they can go to my website, which is Kesiena Boom, all one word, at journoportfolio.com, or maybe it's .journo.
We'll link to it in the show notes.
It's going to get linked.
That's like my answer for everything, which is also so healthy and probably why you have good flirting skills.
I mean,
right.
But yeah, feel free to send me an email, or, you know.
Yeah, you can check out her work too. I mean, I found some cool articles on her website too, and she's written about some pretty awesome stuff. So you can go check
I've written about pretty much everything and anything you can think of to do with sex and relationships. So go have a scroll through and see if you can find something to your liking.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for being here, and thanks everybody for listening, and we will catch you next Monday. Bye.
Bye.